Disturbing news on the state of men in America. Find out what's causing it and what can be done to stop it. Today on 700 Club Interactive.
Well, welcome to the show. In 1966, James Brown sang a song, "It's a Man's World." Maybe at that time it was, I'm not sure. But many women back then weren't educated, and they were unlikely to have a career.
Today, however, over 70% of high school valedictorians are women. And that's not the only statistic that shows that we aren't living in a man's world anymore. Take a look.
Remember the saying, girls rule and boys drool? Well, studies show that there may be some truth to that statement. These days, girls are outperforming boys at all levels, from elementary school to graduate school. Research says that boys are 30% more likely to drop out of school and 5 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. But one thing the stats don't say is why.
Well, here with the answer to that question is counselor and author of Surfing for God, Michael John Cusick. Michael, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me on the program, Gordon.
It seems like we're in a period of decline, and people even are saying that there's the demise of men. What's behind that?
I think what's behind it is that men today are disconnected and distracted. And Philip Zimbardo, in his recent book, The Demise of Guys, is the one who brought about this idea how we're disconnected and distracted largely because of the technology on the internet related to pornography, but also related to the compulsive or often compulsive use of video games.
Well, what does that do to men? Why is that such a problem and leading to predictions of our demise?
Well, first of all, very interestingly, Zimbardo pointed out that by the time a boy or a young man graduates high school, he has spent 10,000 hours playing video games in front of the screen. And the average guy who's exposed to pornography, typically by the age of 11 at the average age, he is looking at an average of 50 clips of pornography per week. And so that's affecting him on an emotional level, a psychological level, a relational level, a spiritual level. And something's happening through that technology where there's something about the mechanism itself of the internet as well as the mechanism of video games that creates a hyper addiction called an arousal addiction. Both of those are on two opposite ends of a continuum, but they both experience an arousal of our autonomic.
You got a book out, Surfing for God, and you devote a whole chapter to what happens to the chemistry in your brain, the neural pathways in your brain, when you get into a compulsion to look at porn. Tell us about that.
I really felt it was important, Gordon, to include that chapter because as a Christian counselor and minister, so often men, and now about 40% of women are reporting a struggle with pornography as well, but so often men come and they say, I've been struggling with this for so long and I can't break free, and I've tried everything. I've tried accountability. I've gone to conferences. And what men often don't realize is there's a very real and very strong neurological connection in their brain that's directly related to the nature of internet pornography in particular. Internet pornography creates a level of novelty and the capacity to see new images so frequently and so many images over such a short a period of time that it does something in the brain that previous kinds of pornography didn't do, and that is that it overstimulates the brain so that there's excess levels of dopamine. Dopamine is known as the gimme, gimme, gimme molecule, or the I gotta have it molecule. And as the excess dopamine is released in the brain, it actually shuts down our capacity to be satisfied or to be full. And so it creates this vicious cycle where you're always hungry but never full with your cravings, and the cycle goes around and around and around. And until we address the neurological part of this, where there are pathways carved in our brains, many men will just continue to struggle despite prayer and Bible study and other kinds of efforts.
You recommend at least a 90-day period before the neural pathways can be reset. You give hope that you can't actually reboot your brain and reboot those pathways, but you recommend a 90-day period. How does a man get through the 90 days?
That's a great question. Many men will balk at the 90-day period initially because they'll say, I've tried that for years and it doesn't work. And so the brain chapter is actually, I think, the 10th or 11th chapter in the book. And prior to that, it discusses all the other issues, the emotional, spiritual issues. I go into depth about the spiritual issues. But again, that will only take a person so far. And when a person can understand that they're not necessarily fighting against their will, or their lack of discipline, which is often the perceived problem, or their lack of spirituality, which is often the perceived problem, but they're actually fighting against their brain and these chemicals that have caused this craving, very often it changes the paradigm and it gives a man a perspective of, wow, I do have a capacity to have self-control, and what's happening here is something in my brain, and that becomes the focus. And many men experience a breakthrough when they begin to realize that, that it's something that's not about their person. It's a physical issue. And so the rebooting process really is like shutting off a computer. It allows things to restart afresh and it resets it. And after a 90-day period, and even throughout that, the brain begins to rewire itself so that those intense cravings begin to stop, and that what was once the path of least resistance, which is to look at porn, now becomes a path of more difficult resistance, and a man can make a choice to not do that compulsively.
Is it also important to shut off the smartphone and the video game and the other things that seem to distract us and just go spend some time outdoors?
Absolutely, yeah. Psychologists have talked about, instead of ADD, NDD, nature deficit disorder, which particularly is an issue amongst young men. And you mentioned my book, and with the release of my book recently, I've spent an enormous amount of time online and Twitter and Facebook. And last Friday at 12 noon, I posted to the cyber world, I'm going off the grid. And so from Friday until this morning, in fact, I pulled away from all my technology. And I was surprised by how I felt some withdrawal symptoms from that, in a sense of wanting to connect. And yet it was something that really brought a sense of spiritual renewal and connectedness to my new heart in Christ, and that was really important. And so I think that we need to regularly step away from the technology, and just like God has given us a day of Sabbath where we need to stop and rest, that we probably need to have technology Sabbaths of sort.
I know for me, if I ever leave my smartphone at home, I will actually debate, should I turn around and go back and get it? You know, it's one of those things you just start to feel, I don't know, it's like an insecurity comes over me. Okay, I'm not going to be in touch.
Yeah.
Is this harming our ability to relate to other people? And in particular, relate to women, because we're so into immediate responses and a variety of responses. How does it cause us to be sort of social introverts?
Well, the man who wrote the book, Philip, I don't believe or know that he's a Christian, but it's a secular research project. And interestingly, he said that men are not only flaming out in school, but they're falling down with women. And the capacity to connect and to be intimate is actually being significantly diminished, first through pornography, but then through video games as well. And the issue with pornography is that it allows a man to feel like a man without requiring him to be a man. And so he can get that sense of being affirmed, and that he is the man, and that he has what it takes to relate to a woman, and that woman wants him. But then when he gets around a real woman, he's awkward and bumbling, and oftentimes may feel deep insecurity and a lack of confidence. And if we're honest, many men feel those things to begin with, and then pornography just throws gas on that fire. But yeah, there's profound interpersonal relationship fallout from pornography and video.
All right, well, this is an interactive program. We've got a question from one of our viewers. Dana writes in, I have a problem with lust and adultery. I used to play video games and didn't read the Bible. Then I took video games out of my life and read the Bible more, but I'm still lusting. What else should I do to try to stop this addiction?
Well, Daniel, first of all, I'm glad that you were able to experience a sense of victory and to exercise a sense of self-control. That is a great thing to give you forward momentum with any habit or issue or addiction. And by you reaching out and asking for help, you're doing one of the things that I encourage people to do, and that is to reach out. But what you need to do is realize that this is very, very likely, if not an addiction, at least a strong compulsion, and that the Bible tells us that the issues related to these kinds of sins of lust and adultery are really about the heart. They're not simply behaviors that we're just kind of making a mistake and choosing wrongly. But Jesus said that sexual immorality and other things come from deep in the heart, not from what's outside of us. And so I would ask the question first to yourself and then to God, what is it in my heart that you want to show me? What is it in my heart that is broken, that you would want to make whole or that you would want to bind up? Remembering that Jesus' very first sermon in Luke 4 was quoting Isaiah 61, and he said that I've come to bind up the broken heart and to set captives free. And that's why Jesus came. And I would ask that question, what's in my heart that is like a kind of broken pile of logs and branches that when that spark of sexual desire lands on that, it starts to burn so out of control. And the other thing I would realize is that, or think about, Daniel, is that beneath that lust in adultery, which is clearly sin and outside of God's boundaries, there's actually a God-given legitimate desire beneath that lust. It was Thomas Aquinas, the philosopher, who said that beneath every sinful behavior, there's a legitimate God-given desire. And so I would predict that underneath that lust and that adultery, there might be some kind of God-given longing for intimacy, for connection, to be affirmed by a woman, to want to feel like a man in your heart. And there's healthy ways to do that and unhealthy ways to do that. And a lot of times it's our story or our early childhood that begins to shape why we can or can't do that in a healthy way. So I would really begin to think about and ask God about the heart, and then ultimately to reach out for counseling. A lot of folks feel like, oh no, it's not that bad yet that I've gone to counseling, but a great Christian counselor can be someone that can just listen and hear your story and point you in the right direction, and it doesn't need to be a total crisis or disaster before you reach out for help in that way.
Michael, great answer. It's a great book. It's called Surfing for God. It's available at bookstores nationwide. And it leads off with this wonderful quote from G.K. Chesterton. Every man who knocks on the door of a brothel is looking for God. And when you start understanding that all those internet searches, what you're really looking for is to fill the God-shaped hole in your heart, you'll get a real insight into your nature and into the way out. Michael, thanks for the book. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Gordon.